All right, so today we're going to dive into a really ancient but incredibly powerful story about a man named Abraham. And this whole tale, it all comes down to one core idea, a divine promise, or what the scriptures call a covenant.
So just picture this for a second. You have God speaking to Abraham, a guy who is way past his prime, and he makes this absolutely spectacular promise. He says his descendants will be as countless as the stars in the sky. I mean, what a beautiful image, right? But there was one massive, glaring problem. See, here's the thing. Abraham didn't have any kids. Not one. He and his wife, Sarah, were old. And from any normal human point of view, this promise wasn't just a long shot, it was completely and utterly impossible. And honestly, that's what makes this whole story so gripping. The stakes just couldn't be any higher.
To really wrap our heads around what's going on, we first have to understand the bedrock of this entire narrative. And that's this concept of a covenant.
So what even is a covenant? Well, it's not just a handshake or a simple business deal. Think of it more like a life-or-death, solemn oath. In the ancient world, this was the most serious, binding promise you could make, something that shaped the destiny of your entire family. It's all about relationship, and you've got to get this to understand everything that's about to happen.
God's promise to Abraham really breaks down into three big pieces. First, descendants, and lots of them, more than he could ever count. Second, a place for them to call home, the land of Canaan. And third, and this is the really big one, that through Abraham's family line, the entire world would somehow be blessed. This is the roadmap for everything that follows.
But Abraham, he was just a man. He was human. And he had some serious doubts. He looks at his reality, no kids, getting older, and he basically says to God, look, that's a nice idea, but what can you even give me? I'm childless. The guy who's set to inherit everything is my head servant, Eliezer. He's trying to find a practical human solution, but that wasn't God's plan.
So, as you can imagine, this impossible promise leads to a whole series of tests, some major missteps, and some really painful lessons about the difference between human effort and divine action. So years go by, and still no baby. Abraham and Sarah decide to, help God out a little bit. They come up with a plan B. They use their Egyptian servant, Hagar, to have a son, Ishmael. But God's plan was always about the miracle. It was always about Isaac, the son who would be born to Sarah when she was 90 years old. So you have this huge contrast, Ishmael born from a human plan, and Isaac born from a supernatural promise.
And the fallout from this human attempt, well, it was tragic. It creates so much conflict in the family that, in the end, Hagar and Ishmael were sent away into the wilderness. Now, the story is clear that God still provided for them. He promised Ishmael would become a great nation himself, but it was just a painful, messy outcome that came from trying to force the promise on their own terms.
We see another kind of test when we look at Abraham compared to his nephew, Lot. Lot picked the best land for himself, settled down in the comfortable city of Sodom, and got really attached to his worldly stuff. When judgment came, he hesitated so much that he nearly lost everything. Abraham, though, he kept living in tents, always on the move, always focused on the future promise, not on present comfort.
So after all this time, all this doubt and waiting, God decides to make his promise official in a way Abraham would understand deep in his bones. And it involved a very strange, very dramatic, and frankly, pretty bloody ancient ceremony.
The whole process is just intense. Animals are sacrificed and literally cut in two, and the halves are used to create this gory path. In that culture, the two people making the deal would walk down that path together. It was a symbolic way of saying, if I break my end of the bargain, may what happened to these animals happen to me. I mean, talk about a binding oath.
But then comes this absolutely staggering plot twist. Abraham is put into a deep sleep. He doesn't walk the path. Instead, only a representation of God, a smoking furnace and a flaming torch, passes between the animal pieces. The message here is unmistakable. This is a one-sided, unconditional promise. God was taking the entire weight of the oath completely upon himself. Abraham had nothing to do with it.
So the miracle finally happens. Isaac is born, and with the promise fulfilled, Abraham's focus completely shifts. Now it's all about making sure this unbreakable covenant gets passed on correctly.
And what's wild is that the pattern repeats itself. Isaac marries Rebekah, but they're childless too. For 20 long years they wait. It's this powerful echo in the story, just hammering home the central theme.
The fulfillment of this promise depends entirely on God's intervention, not on human ability or timing.
Abraham totally understood the stakes. He makes his most trusted servant swear a massive oath. The rules were clear. Isaac absolutely could not marry a local Canaanite woman. And crucially, Isaac must never, ever leave the promised land. The whole covenant was tied to this specific place. Abraham, now with rock-solid faith, was doing everything he could to protect the integrity of the promise for the next generation.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a minute. This promise to Abraham wasn't just some standalone event. It's a key piece in a much larger puzzle of covenants that really form the backbone of the entire biblical story.
You can actually see the progression pretty clearly here. The promise starts out universally, with Noah and all of humanity. Then it narrows to one family with Abraham. Then it becomes conditional, a two-way street, with the nation of Israel at Sinai. Then it goes back to being unconditional, with the promise of a forever king to David. Each one builds on the last, and they all seem to be pointing toward a final new covenant.
So the whole idea is that God's plan funnels down from all humanity to just one family, with the ultimate goal of turning around and blessing everyone through that family. Abraham's story is that critical turning point, a story of promise, human failure, and a divine faithfulness that just doesn't quit. And that really just leaves us with a final thought to chew on. Abraham's entire life was completely reoriented around a single, seemingly impossible promise. It kind of makes you wonder, what are the unbreakable promises, the covenants that define and shape our own stories today?